In this video, I'll be sharing 5 facts you probably didn't know about Apple. Right now, Apple's worth $2.81 trillion, so they're easily the most valuable company, but they weren't always this financially successful. So the first fact you probably didn't know about Apple is in their promotional photos for their iPhones, iPads, and MacBooks, the time was shown on their products is 9:41. Most people don't know what this means. In 2007, when Apple introduced the iPhone for the first time, Steve Jobs, he actually rehearsed his entire keynotes over and over, and they had an estimate saying it took about 40 minutes for them to announce the iPhone to everybody. They weren't 100% sure they could actually reach the iPhone announcement 40 minutes, so they made an estimate of 41 minutes. So that's why it's 9:41. I was surprised by it. It's always on their promotional videos. Till this day, it's still shown on their products, on their iPhones, their MacBooks, and their iPads for 9:41. It's a very special moment for Apple. So the second fact is the iPod might not have been created by Apple. So you see, Tony Fadell, he was the person who made the iPod for Apple, but originally he used to work at Panasonic and Real Networks, and he was originally trying to make an MP3 player that can be really portable and can store thousands of songs. And of course, Panasonic and Real Networks, they were not interested in his idea. So his ideas were pretty much rejected. But later on, Apple took notice of his ideas. They hired him, and a couple years later, they pretty much made an MP3 player that could store thousands of songs, and it was really portable. And of course, that's how in 2001, you pretty much saw the iPod, which saved Apple from bankruptcy. Now let's talk about the third point about Apple. You ever notice in the past there's a slide to unlock feature for your iPhone? So originally back in 2007, Steve Jobs once mentioned, unlock the phone, I just slide my finger across the display and it magically unlocks. And it was a very awe-inspiring moment for the crowd because they've never seen anything like it. It was not Apple who made the idea. It was an engineer in Apple. His name was Bas Ording. He was one of the human interface designers for Apple. He was on a plane, so he felt the urge to relieve himself, so he went to the washroom, and then in the door it showed a slide to unlock. So then he was like, hey, why not try a slide to unlock feature for unlocking? Because back then they weren't sure how to lock and unlock an iPhone. In a couple of years in the development from 2005 to 2007, they figured out a way to make the unlock feature, and it was a very nice feature. Of course, in 2016, it was removed completely for Touch ID and Face ID. So now you don't really need slide to unlock. But the ironic thing is, the iPhone 10 2017, they required you to swipe from the bottom up, because originally they didn't want to do that because they thought it would be really easy to unlock your iPhone. But now you know it doesn't really unlock like that because you need Face ID. So now you know. The fourth fact about Apple was, interestingly, Apple is actually a few weeks away from bankruptcy. So you see in 1997 when Apple got Steve Jobs back into the company, Steve Jobs was pretty much shocked to see what was happening in Apple. There's way too many products and no single vision on what the company was supposed to do. And they didn't have that many weeks left to survive. So Steve Jobs called Bill Gates on the phone, and of course they made a deal where after the call, Bill Gates would invest $150 million into Apple to save Apple from bankruptcy. In that keynote, Bill Gates was on screen in front of the entire audience with Steve Jobs. Of course, the audience didn't like it. They were booing at Steve Jobs and Bill Gates for collaborating. But the entire reason why Bill Gates decided to invest into Apple was he actually didn't really care about investing in Apple in general, but he didn't have a choice because Microsoft was actually under a antitrust lawsuit under the Department of Justice because they were thinking that Microsoft is a monopoly. So they pretty much were about to destroy Microsoft. So Bill Gates decided, you know what? I'm going to show them that Microsoft is not a monopoly. So might as well invest into my competitor. So they invested into Apple, which was Microsoft's biggest competitor at that time. And they saved them from bankruptcy. And lawsuits from the Department of Justice was dropped. Apple's own lawsuit was dropped for copying macOS, and eventually Apple and Microsoft became friends, but now you know that Microsoft saved Apple from bankruptcy. After Microsoft invested $150 million into Apple, Microsoft and Apple made a deal where Internet Explorer will become the default browser on Macs for 5 years, and Microsoft Suite including Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint, would become the default apps on Macs for 5 years. It was pretty much a short-lived deal, but from that, Apple survived. And now today, because of Microsoft, Apple is worth nearly $3 trillion. So now you know. So the final fact about Apple is Apple claimed that they invented multi-touch. Basically, multiple fingers on the display, able to, do gestures, swipe down, etc. In the iPhone dealing in 2007, they were claiming it was the world's first multi-touch display and it was patented. But did you know that it was not Apple who created multi-touch, but a company called Fingerwork? So back then, a person named Wayne Westerman, he created the company Fingerworks, and their goal was basically to make multi-touch gesture pads that was able to interact with Windows using your fingers instead of using styluses back then. So they use multiple fingers to create gestures for the first time and change the application program, etc. And eventually Apple decided to buy them secretly. They were tasked with creating a multi-touch display that could interact with multiple fingers and it could be really sensitive. It was the world's first capacitive multi-touch display in the iPhone. What capacitive means, it's very sensitive to touch. So the early 1990s till 2007, all phones were using a display called resistive. You have to use your finger, apply force on the display to interact with it. It was a very cumbersome experience for most people. It wasn't really that good. Capacitive displays are the only displays that can use multi-touch. Resistive cannot do multi-touch. A couple years after Apple bought Fingerworks, they've made the first multi-touch capacitive display for the iPhone, and back in 2007, it was really innovative. The majority of the people have never seen anything like it, so now you know. Even though this video was about 5 facts you didn't know about Apple, here's some extra facts. There was a third founder in Apple that you probably never knew. His name was Ronald Wayne. He founded Apple with Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. And back then, Ronald Wayne, he owned 10% of the company. But eventually, in 1976, he decided to sell his stake of the company. And in 1976, he decided to leave the company and he sold his shares to Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs for $800. But in today's worth, it would have been over $60 billion. In a couple of interviews in the past, he said he regretted selling Apple shares. Now you know. In 1985, Steve Jobs, who was one of the founders of Apple, was ousted by Apple itself. The board didn't like the way he worked, so they got rid of him. And he created his own computer company called Next Computers. They were pretty much tasked with creating a very high quality computer for business use, and they were able to create multiple products and their own software that would later become Mac OS. He also helped create Pixar, and I was surprised by that because Pixar is very famous for their own movies or animations, but he was one of the founders. There was a cat there. Actually, in 1997, Apple decided to buy Next Computers for $429 million, mainly for their software and Steve Jobs. They mainly needed him because Apple was weeks away from bankruptcy, and they were basically giving Steve Jobs 1.5 million shares of Apple, and they made Steve Jobs the CEO of Apple. Another thing is, much of the tech used in macOS mainly comes from Next Computers. So every time you see the dock, you see the magnifier, you see all those icons, that came from Next Computers, which was created by Steve Jobs when Apple fired him in 1985. Another fact is, even after 12 years of being introduced, the iPad still does not have a calculator app or a weather app. And most people keep on saying, why doesn't the iPad have this? Recently, in 2020, the software engineer, Craig Federighi, he said that basically they wanted to create a calculator app that looked really good on the iPad and a weather app that looked really good on the iPad. They've tried it so many times, but it does not look good on the iPad. It just looks like a blown up version of the iPhone app, and to them, they weren't satisfied. Even there was an engineer back in 2010 saying that Steve Jobs said there needs to be a calculator app that looked good on the iPad. If it does not look good, do not ship it with the iPad. And they decided not to ship it with the iPad. Hope you enjoyed this video. Lots of facts, and I hope you learned something from this. Comment down in the description below if you want to see more videos like this. Make sure to follow my socials for behind the scenes. And make sure to like and subscribe for more videos like this. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.